Welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you for hanging out with us. This should be about a 45-minute to an hour discussion, and we're excited to have you all here. Thanks for the continued support. So today we're going to be talking about why data acts as the maestro of your sales orchestration. And for any sales process to work, of course, long-term, everyone on the selling side, especially your sales development reps, need to be aligned with their current messaging, process, and tech that enables their productivity, and of course, enables that productivity at scale and allows you to repeat that process. So, and really the key that pulls all those strings together is the quality, the depth, and the coverage within its intent and opportunity data. So that's what we're going to be diving into today. And when you're able to do all of that effectively and orchestrate, the revenue and sales processes together, that's the thing that's going to hold it all together is your data. So we're going to be talking about that today. And we got two of the right guys to do it for sure. And before I introduce these two gentlemen to my right, super quick housekeeping items. So number one, if you've ever hung out with me on a Sales Hacker webinar, we do want you to be in the driver's seat. So we have a really good discussion here planned that we've thought out, but we don't just do this to talk to each other. We could talk to each other all day long offline. We do this because we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have some pointed problems or challenges that you're going through right now, jump on the bottom. There's a little chat functionality. There's a Q&A. Let us know your name, where you're from, your title, and any question you have. Can even introduce yourself right now. Always love to know who's in the room with us. And number two is these are always recorded. So if you got to jump off, you got to close a deal, you got to go on a one-on-one with your manager, you got to run a one-on-one because you are a manager, whatever it is, don't let us hold you up. We will shoot this over to you within about 24 hours. So it will be coming your way. But we've got that out of the way. I want to introduce these two gentlemen hanging out with me. First off, we have Matt Lopez, who is a partner over at Skaled Consulting. Matt, welcome to the community, man.
Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
Excited to have you. And also joined by my man, Mark Bedard. Mark is the Director of New Product Sales over at ZoomInfo, powered by DiscoverOrg, DiscoverOrg powered by ZoomInfo. What are we calling it these days, Mark?
ZoomInfo, powered by DiscoverOrg, Scott.
There we go. I love it. You guys are making so many acquisitions these days. I can't really keep up. It's an exciting time.
I know.
It's cool, man. Well, welcome. Okay, so we've got the right people in the room for sure. Before we dive too far into it, I would love it if you two can just give me and the community a little bit more color just on your background, how you got to where you're at today. And Matt, we'll start with you.
Great. Yeah, so I'm a partner at Skaled Consulting. I've been at Skaled, for anyone who's not familiar with Skaled, for about 5 years now. And originally I was director of sales coming into Skaled, and I came on board as the VP of sales. So I would say over the last 5 years, I've had a number of different roles. So started as VP of sales. I was a head of fulfillment for a period of time. I've led some of our largest engagements with some of our largest clients. And I would say over that course of time, it's definitely given me an interesting perspective on sales orchestration and the concept of being data-driven, just having worked with so many of our customers over that period of time. So yeah, I definitely, I think hopefully can provide a lot of insight just on, what does this look like depending on complexity of, company you are, the stage of company you are, and, what does it look like in the world of sales versus lead gen? It's definitely a topic that's kind of near and dear to me.
I love it, man. Thank you. And Mark, yourself.
Yeah, my name is Mark Bedard. I'm a director of go-to-market and our solution sales team here, which to Scott's point encompasses a lot of our new product launches. So you mentioned, making a lot of acquisitions. We continue to hear more and more desires from our clients over the years for different ways to leverage data, and part and parcel of this conversation, right? Different ways to make it work for them, not just have the information, but really leverage it in a meaningful way to make better data-driven decisions. And part and parcel to that is acquiring good fit organizations to roll into our portfolio. So I've been here for 5 years. I've moved up. I was actually started as an individual contributor as an account executive, and promoted up through the ranks. So many of you joining our account executives. 5 years ago, I was doing exactly that. I was not, calling folks up, leveraging outreach, doing probably a lot of the same stuff that many of you guys are doing today. So this is near and dear to my heart. Very excited to be talking to the group.
I love it, man. It would have been such an incredible time to be at ZoomInfo over the last 5 years, and it's cool that you've been a part of that. And I want to quickly just shout out Joe Lachow, who just popped on and said what's up, and he's the lead development manager over at Intelligence North America. Joe, thanks for hanging out with us. Okay, so what I'm kind of hearing from that is, Mark, Matt, you kind of work with a ton of companies, kind of all different sizes, helping kind of build their outbound engine, both from strategic and kind of a tech perspective. So that's kind of the lens, if I'm hearing correctly, Matt, you're going to be speaking to. And then Mark, you're really responsible for this go-to-market execution over at ZoomInfo. And, your primary purpose is really serving up data to sales organizations. So speaking through that lens. So definitely excited to hear both your perspectives. And for the community, we'll try and break this down through a few different lenses. I know there's probably some BDRs joining us. There's account executives, there's directors, there's CROs. So we'll try and speak to a few different things. But before we get into it, I think it's important that we get a kind of a pulse check on who's with us. And I want to ask just two quick questions. Number one is, how many of you have confidence in your sales process going into 2020? I'm super interested to see how people are feeling. I have some guesses myself, but before I make some guesses, Mark, what do you think the split's going to be here?
Well, I know some statistics in the industry that might weight my my stab at it, but I'm very interested given the different breakdown here that we have of folks. I think we've got individual contributors as well as, like you said, executives that might have surprisingly different answers for that. So it's going to be interesting to see the split. Yeah.
I'm excited. This guy's a politician over here. He's not he's not going for it. Matt,
I'll tell you this, Scott. I as data driven as we are, yeah, I would have said no to that, right? Right. I don't have 100% confidence in how we're going to market, and I'm directly responsible for how we do go to market and leverage our data. So if that's any inkling, I'd expect it to be on the no side for the most part. But
for sure. Matt, what are you thinking?
I think as humans, we tend to be overly optimistic. So I'm expecting more yeses than nos. But yeah, look, I think sales has evolved quite a bit in the last few years. So if it hasn't gone through a refresh in, last 24 months, then it probably is time going into 2020. But I'm definitely expecting 60, 70% yes here.
All right. I'm going to go with Mark. I think we're going to go more on the no side. But we'll see. All right, let's close that one up. Ooh, close, man. Close one. All right, so that was 58% saying no, I'm not so confident in my sales process going into 2020. Only 42% said yes, they are confident. So that's interesting. So almost a 60-40 split. Okay, so now I want to take that one layer deeper and ask, what part of your sales process do you think needs the most work? So almost 60% said, I'm not confident. So like, where do you think you need the most help with? And as we're going through that one, quick shout outs, Nicole Evans, sales development and support over at CBORD. Nicole, thanks for hanging out. Kayla Waldorf, business development manager over at AutoGrow, and Erica Evans at ClearPath Robotics, who is a sales exec. Thank you all for hanging out. Mark, what do you think we're going to find here?
Man, I see these every day, and I'm sure Matt's looking at these saying, the same thing. I would not be overly surprised if we see a lot in territory management and tech stack synergy,
Yeah.
given what I think the audience is going to be. But we deal with these, every single one of these process needs every single day. So it's
Matt,
relevant.
what do you think?
I think it'll be a combination of measurement, maybe tech stack synergy. I've just seen on the tech piece, I think we've all seen it, whether you're an account executive or CRO, there's just so much new technology every year. It's difficult to stay ahead of it. And so a lot of stats and trends that suggest if you don't stitch it the right way, it actually can hinder productivity. So I think there's a lot of sales leaders who are feeling that, a lot of sales reps who are feeling that. On the measurement side, I think some people might look at that as to, how to understand what's working and what's not working. I think as having been a sales leader before, I know the MO is to kind of beat the drum on activity. And I think that's obviously activity is still important, but I think in 2019, 2020, where there's so many different, channels to communicate with people and so many different ways to get, a meeting booked or to close a deal, I think a lot of reps are still feeling the pain of being measured on the wrong activities. So I have a feeling we're going to see a few people pick that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. All right, let's see. Interesting. Prospecting research, the overwhelming majority. So that sounds like people can't get the right information of the right people. That's what it sounds like. So that's super interesting. Measurement was the next one up. So Matt, you're right on board there. I'm interested with the tech stack synergy. I wonder if that's because that's someone else's issue, maybe in like ops or enablement. I don't know if we have too many ops and enablement folks on here. That's super interesting to me. When you hear that, Matt, what do you think? People are just struggling with like basic prospect research. That should be like, that's the type of stuff that give AI, like give that to, we shouldn't even be doing that stuff in my eyes.
I agree. I think prospecting research is an interesting one to pop up. I'd be curious, at some point to understand like what it is about the prospecting research that people are struggling with. What I've seen is a lot of times companies are starting, at the top are setting the target too wide. And the way that plays out at an account executive level is, their ICP or their buyer personas are so vast that they don't really know where to start, and where to research. A lot of CROs, a lot of VPs of sales are making research a part of cadences today, which I think is great.
Yeah.
But, I've worked with companies who are primarily SMB focused and, companies that are primarily enterprise focused, everything in between. And I think there's a spectrum to research depending on where you fall on that end. And, if you're not being more specific as a CRO or a VP of sales, when you're asking for research to be a part of the cadence, as to say, hey, but for this specific ICP, here are the 5 data points that you should really be understanding about your buyer before you go and, start to have a conversation, and how does that change in an enterprise play and how much time should you be spending there? I think that can become distracting and frustrating for reps who aren't getting enough guidance there.
Totally. Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up, is there's different levels to prospecting research. We might not just be talking about, hey, I can't get the direct dial or the email, or I can't find them on LinkedIn. It's like, to make an effective outbound message, I need to know more about them strategically, what their overall business outcomes are. There's like a lot of nuances to like what that could mean.
Yeah, everyone's talking about personalization and adding value and getting away from high volume bulk email campaigns. And so it's like, great, what information should I be looking for then? And I've seen a lot of sales leaders who don't really give that level of guidance. They just, we'll make it relevant. And I think where that can go wrong is, just because they're in Chicago and you open your message with "Go Bears," that may not be super relevant to that person. So
totally. Yeah, I think we're pushing much more in the relevant spectrum than the personalization. Like, gone are the days. I think when like marketing automation first came out, Go Bears would work because all you were trying to do was prove that you were a human, because no one wanted to be duped by these new technologies. And now they're so table stakes that it's like, I know you can just pull that dynamic field and like, so exactly. Now what proves you're human is this relevance piece and this comprehension of you understand me, you understand my world. I would even argue, as far as I have some thoughts on this, where, I think we might even hit a point where we won't care as much, is this a human on the other end, as long as someone has made it hyper relevant. Like I think of when I get, mass blast emails in the B2C world, I know that not one is sent from a human, but when they're super relevant and I'm like, oh shit, I actually need that juicer. Like my girlfriend was just bugging me about that and I totally forgot. And it comes, I'm like, that's helpful and I care. So
yeah,
anyway,
B2C is definitely still a step ahead when they look at things like intent. Like, especially like now holiday time, we're all Google searching something or doing research on something. And B2C is just much more sophisticated about understanding that. And then they're going to make sure that if you're looking to buy a new DSLR camera or guitar, whatever it is that you're into, right? Like everyone who needs the data understand who are the people buying cameras, guitars, whatever it is. Like they are getting, they're getting just prospected, in a B2C format the way that they should. And I feel like B2B, we're starting to catch up to that, but we're still not quite there.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a good measure to look at B2C, and we're usually like 3 to 4 years behind in the B2B world.
For sure.
It's nice that we're catching up. Mark, so interested to get your take on this, because when you look at that, it must almost, I don't know, I imagine almost be frustrating, because you take away a lot of that prospecting research pain, and hearing that people are still struggling with. What's your take on it?
It's interesting, right? Like, I mean, that is like definitely my first thought, and certainly, the ZoomInfo crew here, like thinking about it is, well, just leverage Zoom, right? Like get access, get the information you need. But I think it goes a step deeper, and this is part and parcel to why we're having this conversation. It's not just having the direct dial or having the email anymore, to your guys' point, right? Mm-hmm. And I really like what Matt had said earlier there of the notion between activity versus meaningful activity. And even Kyle McDonald putting a question in there, how do we create emails that are personalized enough to reach our contract, but general enough so that they can shift to general groups, right? We want to do it at scale, but it needs to be personalized enough. And this is really where data orchestration plays in. Mm-hmm. It's not so much about getting the information or having it accessible to an individual contributor. It's how do I leverage that in a meaningful way that then I can have my data work for me, right? It's not, we'll take your example there that Matt threw it up about the intent, right?
Yeah.
Well, great to have intent data. If I gave Matt every single driver of intent today, he would be like, "Oh, that's great. It's a lot of data, but who should I reach out to right now?" Right? I've showed them, hey, a lot of people are interested in it, but you still have that next step of, okay, these are triggers or events that have happened that lead me to believe that this organization or this person should be reached out to today. That's excellent. That's the first step. And then the second step is, okay, now let's craft a message. Being data-driven, to your point, Scott, right, earlier, I need to pull in a couple of these snippets. I need to pull in a couple of these data points to make it relevant. But it needs to start with that trigger. It needs to start with that relevant event that happened, whether that be someone visited your website or someone surging on a particular intent topic, or someone received funding, right? An organization received funding. These are all events that we've commonly put in the reps' hands and asked the reps to do, where, to your point earlier, Scott, should we even be doing that? I think that's something I'd like to spin back to you guys is, should the reps own that, or should we make data-driven processes that ensure efficiency through catching all of that, and do that more from an operational level and let our salespeople take prospecting off their plate again? It's an interesting dynamic, What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I don't want everyone being up in arms that we're trying. Oh my God, we're trying to replace salespeople. That's not what this is about. It's about taking. In short, I think it should be more on the hands of operation to create the parameters or the guidelines where our sales development reps or our AEs can operate out of. So like Matt, you said, we always, you nailed it. Is like, we say, hey, we need to personalize, and we need maybe 3 bullet points to show that it's personalized, but like, let's actually pull that in for our reps and still have them do a human touch. They can craft it themselves, but let's pull that from somewhere so that it takes that off of their plate. And I think you can operationalize a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most salespeople understand that it's an efficiency play. It's how do as the rep, how do you become more efficient to spend more time closing deals with warmer leads, or increasing conversion rates to get, to with less at bats, get to the same or higher number. The CRO, VP of sales perspective, I think of sales as a department, or salespeople, as a person, as typically the Ferrari of the business. It's probably your most expensive person or department within the organization. And so, it's that person, a lot of those people are probably making as much money as the CEO, if not more, in a lot of companies. So it's like, how do you make that person as efficient as humanly possible so they're not spending their time on less effective activities day to day? So I try to always look at it through that lens. I don't think sales will ever go away. I think there's always going to be a need for human touch and, decision making. So it's just really about how do you make people more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. We have some great questions coming in already. And a few shout outs: Leah Storm, Tom Hansen, Oliver Sequin, Benjamin Jimenez, and Dan Gottlieb. Dan, what's up, man? From Topo. He's got a really good question, which I want to dive into. But before we get to that question, I think we should take a really quick step back. And I would love to, from both of your perspectives, in both of your roles, let's define what data-driven sales orchestration means. And Mark, I'll start with you.
That's a big one. It's a big topic. I think I'm not going to define it from a definition perspective. I think talking about it as it relates to a maturity around how a particular organization leverages it is probably more apt. We look at organizations leveraging data very much from a discovery phase, an integration phase, and then an automation phase. So in a discovery phase of leveraging data and having that work for you, it's more from what you talked about in the beginning, Scott, prospecting capabilities. People know ZoomInfo for our prospecting tool, right? We do a lot more, but a lot of people know us from a sales perspective from that prospecting tool. That is a very rudimentary form of data orchestration, given that now the rep or the individual, the end user isn't sourcing that information, right? Which is normally part of their process, right? I need to go find that contact, find the contact information, be able to reach out to that person. That takes time. So in and of itself, we're providing that data to that individual, which is very on the starting end. The second bit would be to get the information within the workflows, within the marketing automation system, the CRM, wherever those end users, wherever the organization's leveraging that information, and to put it there. So essentially the data that they need, where they need it, automatically happening. Again, we're saving kind of 2 steps now, right? I'm not counting on the rep to be able to find the prospects, to be able to put them into the CRM. It's going to be available there in the CRM for the rep already. It's going to be available in the marketing automation. We're already rolling sequences out to those individuals that we're trying to reach out to. And lastly is full data orchestration, if you will, the pinnacle, which is leveraging changes in information, leveraging changes in data. And this will go part and parcel to your question there that you got in the Q&A, which is leveraging things like Matt was talking about, intent data, or like I said, funding, or IP information. Certain events, triggered events that are going to prompt a response can start the process toward leveraging that information in an automated fashion, right? I can collect that information, I can collect that data and leverage that as a trigger to roll out a sequence of events from there. So whether or not I say, okay, this organization is viewing my website today, right now, this second, therefore I'm going to pull that company back, populate it with all of my ideal customer profiles, the kinds of people that I know I should be reaching out to based on job function, management level, title, whatever it happens to be, populate those in and drop them directly into a predetermined outreach sequence. That's the kind of capability that we have today, right? That's the kind of thing that we're talking to our clients about, true data orchestration. And it all starts with that change or that data change, that event that happened. It's long-winded, but that's my definition, if you will.
No, I love it. And I think we got to part of Dan's question as well, which is awesome. And I guess one of the things is, and this is kind of building off of your answer, is does that change then our expectation for how much activity our reps are able to do? If we're serving up this intent data and getting them to leverage that, are we putting their weekly expectation for activity down, or are you saying you can operationalize it to the point where it doesn't even affect how much they can produce?
This kind of goes to Matt's point, right? Do I want my top executive prospecting? And maybe that's a question that the organization has to ask themselves, right? Do I want my SDR prospecting? Like, do I really think that my SDRs are doing this in the most effective manner? Let's say I have 25 SDRs, Scott, and I've got a fleet of them, right? And I send those guys out and I say, here's the accounts that I've predetermined, right? That you should go after. First off, are you deciding on those accounts in a data-driven process? Like, are you using data modeling? How are you deciding those? Is that subjective? Are you just choosing those accounts, right? If you're not leveraging data to drive that initial decision on which accounts they should go after, you're going to be more efficient. Secondly, now I'm saying, okay, rep, SDR, go into that account, find who we should talk to. I'll give you a kind of a general scenario, job function management level title, whatever it is, of who you should be going after based on persona. Okay. So they go in there, do all 25 adhere to that exactly? Are those even the ones that we should be going after? Have we done modeling to understand based on our closed won business, right, of who we actually do sell to from an objective perspective? I'm not saying subjective, right? I don't want us to just say, hey, we sell to marketing and sales people, so therefore we go after that. Do we really? Or do we sell specifically to marketing operations people? Or do we sell to sales enablement folks, right? What is actually driving that decision? Is it subjective or is it objective? And if they're not making objective data-driven decisions, there's already going to be a massive amount of inefficiency in that process. So why not just automate that whole for the SDRs? And to your point, if I'm already populating based on, I'm counting on them to find the funding, right? Or to find, they're going Crunchbase, right? And they look at and they try to find whatever, if they got funding or whatever it is, taking time to do that, but also are all 25 of them doing that, right? Can I ensure that they're all efficient to that level? You know, Matt, you've probably seen a lot of these kinds of scenarios and helped clients kind of work through this. Are you pointing them toward automation, or are you still putting the onus on the rep to be able to prospect into their book of business? How are you guys handling that?
I mean, we're firm believers that technology is going to be a differentiation point for a lot of companies, and today it already is, but will continue to be in the future. So, you know, if you're not automating it because you want people to be more hands-on or whatever excuse you come up with, there's going to be some other company who competes with you who's going to automate it, and they're going to, they're just going to be able to do more with less. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at what's going to get you to the right result or the greatest result fastest, I believe you should automate wherever, it doesn't hinder your ability to sell, right? And I wouldn't do it in areas where, if you look at the buyer journey, they feel like they're being put through, kind of a robotic process. I try to do it in a way where, it surfaces, like an example would be surfacing up information that would allow a sales rep to say, of these 100 leads, I'm going to, do my 50 daily activities on these 50 because I know that they have the higher likelihood of then getting to, maybe the next metric they're looking at is discovery calls booked. I can, the system's already telling me that this, these are the better leads to target. If you can then automate it to a level where those are automatically dropped into an outreach cadence, like great, but at some point it's going to require a human interaction. So I think, to go back to the original question, I wouldn't, I think it was Dan's question, I wouldn't necessarily go and, I wouldn't say automation should be changing the activity number, or target. It should be likely, changing the activity type, where it's, hey, I want you to focus on X activities targeting this type of lead, or I want you to, the activities, instead of being equally distributed across, call, email, social DM, we should, more heavily prioritize, doing LinkedIn DM potentially, because we're seeing that there's a 3x conversion on those activities versus others. But I think, again, it's like where data kind of changes that is it tells you how to prioritize versus just treating everything equally and over indexing in the wrong places.
Yeah. I agree. So I want to double click on a few of those things. So it seems like intent data keeps kind of bubbling to the surface, and it is a hot topic right now. So I want to talk about a really tactical way to implement it. I want to get both your opinions. So let's say I have, I've garnered some intent data. Someone is searching for maybe my competitor, and I have a hold of this, and I'm a BDR, and I'm salivating. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get this account for sure. Do I reference the fact that I know that information, or do I keep that in my back pocket and just reach out knowing that? And Mark, I'll start with you. What do you coach as a best practice?
I'd say I would probably know it in your back pocket. I don't think coming out there and showing the data to them, right, is necessarily going to get you the right response. It doesn't add any value by providing that, saying, hey, I know that you guys have been researching it. So what's up? Why haven't you looked at us, right? Or have you looked at us? I think your point's really valid, though. I can't remember if it was Serious Decisions or who released the most recent stat on that, but 70% of the purchases made right now, the buyers are researching way before contacting a rep, right? Or contacting the organization. So it's like pretty much you can expect that every single person is going to be doing some research prior to even reaching out to you. Do I need to mention that to the person when I'm reaching out to them? No. Why? Because, well, even in an intent data scenario, right? I don't necessarily know. It's not B2C intent, right? This is B2B intent. So I don't know in a lot of these scenarios who the actual individual is. Often it's the organization that is researching it, right? So I'm not going to call you up and be like, hey, Scott, I know sales hack. I know you were looking at stuff, and you're like, I wasn't looking at anything. It was Alex was doing it, right? So I definitely keep it in my back pocket. They're going to say, hey, great timing. That's awesome.
Yeah. I would tend to agree, except the one nuance about 5 years ago, I was running a BD team. This is before outreach. They wouldn't even have existed yet. We were using HubSpot, and they just came out with the functionality where you could see everyone who was coming to your website, and it had just came out. And so we did this campaign where we called it just like a needle in the haystack campaign. And if Coca-Cola came to our website, there's 20,000 people at Coca-Cola, but we would just try and be as helpful as possible. And it was just the subject line would be, can I give you a hand? And we'd just be like, hey, someone at your organization has been repeatedly on our website. We're trying to find out who it is so we can help them solve this problem. Can you point me in the right direction? And back then, it was actually quite an effective campaign. But I wouldn't recommend it today because kind of the cat's out of the bag a little bit more. Matt, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically I probably would have agreed with what you're both saying in terms of not calling it out. I don't think I wouldn't go out of my way to say it, but I do think most people probably know. It's like they've kind of become smart to the fact that these tools exist and we have these insights. Like when I get an email immediately after I've opened the other email, or I can see that the number of follow-ups goes up when I open the email or I respond once. I know that they have all that data, and I'm getting kind of cycled to the top of the list that probably accelerates me into a new cadence. So I don't think, I think the cat's out of the bag in that sense too, where it's like, if it doesn't, unless it feels disingenuous for some reason by telling them that, I probably wouldn't hide it either. A good example, so I'll give you like probably the most practical example of how we've used buyer intent for one of our customers earlier this year. So, and we did very specifically call out that we were reaching out based on intent, and it worked really well. So we were working with a company. It was a really fun project that was trying to disrupt the single family home real estate space. And they wanted to digitize the process. So instead of going through a real estate agent to buy your home, you would go through their website, similar to what companies like Zillow and a few others are trying to do now. And basically the whole process was digitized. And once you got to a certain point in this process, you would be assigned almost a virtual real estate agent, but effectively a salesperson on the back end. And what we had to figure out early on was there's a lot of people who are visiting their website because that's where their inventory exists. They're looking at the home, they're liking the home. Eventually they're going and touring the home, and then eventually they can submit an offer. But there's all of this data that we're collecting, and there's a lot of people going through this process. And it's like, how do you prioritize in a way where this sales team of, when we built it from the ground up, we only had 20 salespeople, does not possibly have the bandwidth to go and reach out to every single person, at the top of this funnel. And so what we found over time was the most ideal time, looking at the buyer experience, for them to have someone reach out to them was right after they had their first positive experience with a home tour. And so what we decided to do was we set up tracking on the doors. So as soon as that door would close, it basically let our system know, okay, this person that we know just toured has just left the home. And we had a system that we used that basically sent a text message out to that person and just had them score it. How was your experience with the home? Just text back 1 through 10. And if they texted anything 7 or higher, that was basically the introduction for our sales team to get involved. So the lead would hit them in CRM. They would see the score. They'd get all the information they needed to go and have a conversation. What was it that they looked at the home? What were their preferences in the buying in the home buying process? And so we were just having people only follow up with those leads, and that was like one of the first game changers in terms of how we use data to really start to accelerate, prioritize, and let a relatively small team of 20 people actually start to have conversations where the majority were positive instead of the majority, kind of calling people who were candidly just tire kicking.
That's so smart, Matt. I mean, that's excellent, man.
Yeah, that's a great example of there's so many, when you talk about data and specifically intent data, there's so many ways to look at it, and people get kind of pigeonholed. And I think that's a great way that you guys set up this extra layer on top of data. Okay. I got a couple more questions, and then we're going to hit the community pretty hard because we have a ton of questions coming through. But one thing I want to know is, so let's say I'm listening to this and I'm not overly confident in my kind of data orchestration. You two both talk to a lot of companies. So how do you go about understanding their data strategy, and how could I self-diagnose kind of where my data strategy is lacking? Like, what are the first questions you guys usually ask when you're helping organizations? Mark, I'll start with you.
I'm actually going to toss it to Matt, if that's okay, Scott. I think he's probably had a lot of conversations around orchestration as a whole as the starting point. So you probably have a framework or something, that's going to be a little more meaningful than what I can add, I think.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, look, I think for me, I think it's really easy to start questions on data cleanliness and, what data points are you providing? And, when was the last time the leads were refreshed, and do you have enough, and have that conversation. But I feel like it likely gets too tactical, and it doesn't end up actually solving, the reason why you're trying to refresh leads. It doesn't really end up solving that problem in the first place. So for me, typically I'm starting the conversation just more on understanding who's the buyer, like where do they live digitally? Where do they go and learn? Where do they go to get answers from? How do they buy? When you have seen them buy, what have been the intent signals that you've, started to see? Are there any patterns there? So really just trying to uncover who's the buyer, what's the buyer journey, because at the end of the day, that's going to be centric to, anything you're trying to clean or refresh or inject into the outbound or sales process. And I think from there, the goal is really starting to narrow in, just recognizing that a lot of companies go way too wide. And, if you ask yourself, who's your target market that, this specific sales team on your floor is selling to? And the answer is anybody hiring, or, anybody, any SaaS company that's doing more than X million dollars. It's like, yeah, way too wide. Like you're going to drive these people insane. Like there's no way they're going to be able to be personalized, relevant. There's no way you're going to be able to surface the right data points because there's just going to be too many. It's not a real segment within your total addressable market. So then I think, once we've kind of narrowed in on, well, where are we prioritizing? Where should we prioritize in terms of who we're targeting, our sales team is targeting and within our segments in the market, then you can start to get into, okay, great. Let's start to understand, how clean is the data? How accessible is your data? How is that surfaced throughout, for an SDR who's prospecting, how much of that data is available to them? How much are you expecting for them to go and find that on their own? For sales, which are those data points, right? Do you find are most relevant? Like, how is that getting surfaced within the sales process? And then I really start to think about internal too. I think that's the other area where this, can go wrong is a lot of times, and especially if you think about orchestration, we always think about multi-threading on the external side, which is like, okay, there's multiple people from their side that I almost need to play chess with and figure out like, how am I going to bring in the right people at the right time? And I think a lot of times companies forget about the internal piece, which is just because, maybe I'm the account owner for this account or this global account as an account, an enterprise account executive or SDR, there are other people within my business who probably, at some point are going to need to have insight on what's happening in this opportunity. And so thinking about, what are the right data points for them to see so that they can come in and help you go and close a big deal. So I think eventually it becomes, transitions from who's your buyer and mapping the buyer-centric journey to, okay, and how do we want to ensure our sales process is aligned to that so that data is reaching the right people on our side too, to ultimately align the two worlds.
I like it. That's a great framework. And I love that point about how we always think about, bringing in data from external sources and stuff, but how do you then serve up that data throughout your own internal organization to the key stakeholders? Again, only the stuff that's relevant. We talk about relevant to our buyers, but, our director of customer success, what does he know? He need to know. What are the exact things that he needs to know? What does finance need to know as we go through? That's a really a great point, man. Mark, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, that two thoughts, right? So, and I know Matt and I have talked about this at length previously, which is, keeping it simple. I think so much of data orchestration or, solving any kind of data challenge can get out of hand so quickly. And one of the big red flags, we see is trying to come at it with one objective or one outcome that they're looking for. And eventually more and more people get involved in the process. And they have different data challenges, right? Which are all could be solved maybe by, whatever data points or whatever orchestration that initial outcome was looking to achieve, but doesn't need to, right? It's not reliant on that necessarily. So it's better off just to solve the problem that you have at hand, that is an issue, the most pressing thing, solve that, gain the residual benefits from that after the fact. And if there's gaps that are really relevant in different parts of the organization after the fact that they're leveraging the data, because again, the data is going to go through the organization kind of like water through sand, right? Not trying to pile it all up and trying to solve everything up front. I will say this though, in accordance to Matt's answer, and this is really how I would look at it when we phrase it with our clients, is start with the outcomes first and foremost. And I think Matt summarized that perfectly. You need to understand what you're doing. If you're doing territory alignment, great. If you need to improve your prospecting process, awesome. Like, just define what business challenge you're having to start. Don't just say, my data is garbage. I'm not leveraging data in the best way. I need to solve it. That's a magic wand approach. That's not going to work, right? You need to be meaningful about what you're actually looking to solve. Second is deal with the data. So Matt harped on this a lot, and we've done tons of speaking about this too, which is around enrichment of data or cleanliness of data. I always harp on the fact that it's not clean data. I don't care about that. We talk about the 5 C's of data management, right? Correctness, consistency, completeness, currency, and coverage. And if I've got a problem with my data, it might be a completeness problem, right? I have gaps in my data. It might be correct. It might not be right. Those are different challenges that can be solved in different ways. Don't just say my data is garbage, right? And I need a magic wand approach. So again, be very poignant about that. Objectives or outcomes, what you're looking for, the data first. And then lastly is the orchestration. after all is said and done, let's figure out how operationally we solve these problems, right? But you need to ensure that you understand what you're solving first and foremost. You understand that you have a data-driven approach and you have the right information that you can rely on. And then lastly, we can actually operationally solve it. People get so bogged down in the operational process, and companies like Outreach and consultancies like Scale, there's so many ways that technology has advanced. That's actually probably the easiest part of the whole bit. People get bogged down in operationalizing it to start, when that's not, that's kind of out of box. I can drop it into an Outreach sequence and it can be way more efficient than my reps could ever do in 2 seconds. It's effortless, right? So don't get bogged down in the orchestration or the operationalization of it. Worry about the outcomes, make sure the data is right, and then worry about the orchestration.
I like it. Great advice. Okay, last question, and then I'm going to shut up and I'm going to get our communities to drive the next 10, 15 minutes of this. Last question is just making it hyper actionable. So what is the biggest action that you recommend that a company can take? Someone listening to this, they're like, okay, we need to take some action that will both enlighten what they've been missing and then also deliver some immediate results. And Matt, I'll start with you.
I think, mine, the simplest one is really just mapping out the buyer journey. It's one of those things that it was a buzzword. It's become a buzzword in the last few years of being buyer centric. And I can't tell you how many, sales reps or sales, companies I've worked with in the last 5 years who believe that they're buyer centric, but when you look at how they're selling, it is completely one-sided. And I think if you don't understand who's on the other side of this process and how they want to buy, it really makes all the rest of this basically moot, because you can have the cleanest data, all of this intent, but if it's not, if you don't know which one of those levers to pull on and when, because that's how that person wants to be sold to, you're still going to build something inefficient. And so I would say the action item I would take out of this, if I were, anyone on this call, whether you're an account executive talking to a former customer, someone you've sold to in the last quarter or so, or CRO or VP of sales, is set up conversations with your former clients and really understand how the experience went. Was it a good experience? Was it a bad experience? How would they have preferred it to go? And start to map out a buyer process the same way you would map out a sales process, with stages and exit criteria, and really just make it rich with how do they want to buy? How do they move from one stage of awareness to intent to consideration? What does that look like for them? And then think about where can we go and get the information we would need to basically meet them in the middle.
Yeah, I love that. So unbelievably important. And it's my only 2 cents there is it's never a one and done exercise. You're going to have to map the buyer's journey again and again, and it's going to be an ever evolving thing as you collect more data. Mark, same question, but your way.
Yeah, I agree with Matt wholeheartedly. The buyer journey is massively important. I'd kind of go back to the outcomes, stick with the actual business solution that you're looking to achieve to start. And then everything else backfills into that, right? If you just go and you try to start with, the data, or you want to start with, operationalizing everything and making it really efficient, but you start building prior to actually understanding what you're building. It goes back to Matt's point there. It doesn't matter how nice the process is, how robust your guys' PowerPoints are around, explaining it to the executive leadership, or if you are executive leadership, explaining it to the board, or if you're the board, then I don't know. I guess that's it. But the point being is
the market.
The market, there, shareholders.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, start with the business outcomes, and then everything else will fall into place. And work with great companies. Work with people who have done this before. I don't want to toot our horn or anyone on this call's horn, but we've done a lot of this. And I know all 3 organizations here very well, and we're all consultancies, right? We all work extremely close with our clients on these. I guarantee you, I promise you, you will not bring up a scenario that we haven't heard. You know, everyone always comes to you, and Matt, you can second me on this, but everyone comes to you saying, I got the most unique scenario ever. It's the most unique sales process. You guys are never going to understand it. And it's always the same thing, right? So work with people who have done it before too.
Yeah, great advice. So map the buyer's journey, you know, make a work back plan from the business outcome solutions that you want. And, you know, that third piece, work with people that have done it before. So incredibly important. There's so much content out there today. There's just so much that you can do. You don't have to reinvent the wheel by any means. Okay, so let's go. We've got some great questions. There's been amazing engagement throughout this webinar. I want to keep us on track because some of them are they're all great questions, just not completely focused. So let's talk about this one. Interesting question. This is Benjamin. Ben, thanks for the question. When selling to an enterprise, is it smarter to involve more people within the enterprise to close the deal? Or is it standard to sell to big groups when speaking to an enterprise? He says, there's research showing today that when it goes from 3 decision makers to 6 decision makers, it can slow down or even kill a deal. Too many opinions get involved. Love to hear your thoughts. My initial thoughts, yes. The more you have to be tactful with who you bring into the deal. Don't bring in people for the sake of bringing them in because they could slow it down. But I'm very much of the school right now, like the more people that you can have your web in the enterprise, the better. Unfortunately, it may slow down your deal. I'm not arguing with that. I'm of the school, let's get as many people, relevant people involved in the decision-making process early as possible. But would love to hear, Mark, your thoughts on this one.
I mean, this is something that's inevitable, right? I think the most recent study was showing 14 buyers that are involved in any kind of B2B or buying decision. So, I mean, the panels now, I remember back when it was 5 or something like that, 5.6, and then it went to 7.8 or something. Now it's 14. So next thing you know, there'll be committees upon committees that are making decisions. I think it really does boil down a lot to what solution you're selling, right? And how you're selling it. So if you're selling an individual endpoint solution, right? I'm selling a user license that has a web access, like a ZoomInfo, right? If somehow you sell an individual license of something and that's your go-to-market for that, well, great. Like, don't involve anyone. Involve one person, right? Try to just wrap it up. Try to keep it small. That's your go-to-market mission, right? That's how you're planning to capitalize on that organization. It's a groundswell approach into the enterprise account. If you sell, cloud infrastructure, well, you're gonna involve 50 people at that company, at any enterprise organization. It's gonna be a buying panel, whether you like it or not, because that's ripping and replacing, a lot of processes, and it affects a lot of people. So I think it kind of boils down to what you're selling and how you're selling it.
Yeah, agreed. Matt, thoughts?
I agree completely. I mean, I think any stat that's saying you can close deals faster by selling through less people is probably analyzing a set of data where in the deals that were lost, they were trying to incorporate people who were not actually decision makers, and so it was just a distraction. And, I think it's similar to Mark's point. If you're having in discovery smart conversations up front and understanding who's the actual decision maker, and then who are the other people who are going to be highly influential in this process, either because they work in an ancillary department that you're inevitably going to touch because you are ripping out something that's, already been operationalized for the last 20 years. Those people are going to get involved at some point, and you're either going to be a part of that conversation and you're going to have a chance to influence it, or you're not. And more times than not, I've seen from working with our clients, when they're able to kind of break everyone apart and understand at a one-to-one level, how they're tied to this challenge and solution, and then they can stitch the central narrative together and bring everyone back and unify everyone around, what's the common goal that we're trying to achieve, but be able to speak the language of each individual, who really has an important say at that table. That's how I've seen enterprise sales work most effectively. I've yet to see a scenario where by cutting people out who are highly influential, somehow it increases effectiveness. It might slow down an earlier stage because you have a couple of extra conversations, but your conversion rate is going to go up enough so that the net is you're generating more dollars per minute selling or whatever equation you want to slice it up as.
Yeah. And even if you manage to sneak that deal past the finish line, guess who's churning the next year?
Oh yeah.
Which is the whole other topic that we could discuss. Yeah. Like just putting a bow around that, and Matt, I couldn't agree more. Like if people are being affected by the decision to implement your product or your service, they're going to get wind of it eventually. Do you want to control the narrative? Do you want them controlling the narrative? I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, do you want your AM or RM coming back to you in 6, 12 months? Like, what is this?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, here's another interesting one. Again, each one of these questions could probably be like hour-long conversations. This is from Louise. Louise, thanks for the question. So Louise, it sounds like a question about credibility. So he's selling a B2B software solution for culture and companies that allow remote workers. Where he needs help is how to approach large companies with a solution that he's coming from a startup. So he's trying to sell, sounds like, to the enterprise. He's a startup, lacking credibility. He wants to know practices, tools in general, how you can convince them that our product is a solution that they're looking for. Sounds like a credibility issue. Matt, you want to take a first stab at that one?
Yeah, I think that's always tough. I mean, Skaled did not have many customers 6 years ago, and we kind of went through that phase too. I think whenever you're in that scenario and people don't know who you are, and you're selling to big companies who want to buy proven and reputable, if you can deliver on what you can say you deliver on, then I think one way is to make it easier for them to take an initial bite of the apple, whether that's by doing, a pilot with, KPIs for success, that if we achieve X, Y, and Z in the next, 30, 60, whatever it is, however much time it's going to take you to get there, then we're just going to kind of, agree that we'll move into this phase 2 where now you can staff, 80% of the people that you would have scoped in maybe your current, phase 1 of an opportunity. So I think it's just being thoughtful about, if it's a credibility issue, then they're going to want proof, and how can you do that either in the sales process or by, trying to do some form of a proof of concept to show value and build credibility quickly with, measurable levers for how do we move into a formal partnership.
Totally. Yeah. I love that. Lowering the barrier to entry is huge. It's about, mitigating their risk, where it kind of becomes a why not decision. Like, yeah, but why wouldn't you give us a shot? What if we could actually do what we're saying and there's no risk to you? That's a good one. Mark, what about you? What are you thinking is, how do you increase credibility? I imagine, trying to think, 5 years, ZoomInfo, you weren't the big name that you are now,
Very true.
Yeah.
No, we weren't. I think in threes, right? So I'm going to give you 3 bullets again, Scott. But I think about it in terms of, 1, relevance. It goes back to what we've been talking about this whole time. Be relevant about it, whether that, it's data driven at the end of the day, whether you like it or not. If you are relevant, you're probably leveraging data to inform that decision, right? So be relevant in your message. Do it at the right time. Do it when they need it. Have confidence. I think a lot of startups don't have confidence, and a lot of small organizations we talk to don't truly believe it, right? And like, drink the Kool-Aid. If you're a rep, drink the Kool-Aid, man. Like, get in it. And then lastly is trust. Build trust with your clients and prove it to them, right? I think if you can prove it and you can build trust, that's invaluable. That's massive. And that's how you crack the big boys. That's how you build credibility. None of us were the organizations we were 5 years ago by any means, right? And through building trust with our clients and consulting them on best practices and helping them achieve their missions and their desired outcomes, we're able to build that trust and foster great relationships with them. So,
yeah, totally agree. The final things I'll add there is, 1, I've worked at startups. We had a lot of success going through setting up channel partners. So if you have any, larger companies that you work with, or you're an ancillary product for them, you can sometimes piggyback on their credibility a little bit. And then number 2, which Skaled, you guys crush it at this, is just because you are a smaller company doesn't mean your brand can't be bigger. You can create content. You can create this almost media company feel. You could be, like you said, a culture software, but everyone knows your name and you have 3 clients because you have built an incredible brand and you put out really valuable content, and that will give you an extra level of credibility, Skaled being
100%.
a fantastic example of that.
Yeah, LinkedIn is gold right now. It's right.
It really
Whether
is.
you're an account executive or the CEO, if exactly what Scott's saying, you control your brand. And at 80%, I think they say, of B2B leads right now in social are coming from LinkedIn. So we believe 2020, your brand is going to be developed by your salespeople, and LinkedIn is going to be, for right now, at least this year, next year, and foreseeable future, it's the place to do it.
Totally. Absolutely. It's how you can get that credibility quite quickly. All right, gentlemen, that takes us to our time. There's one question from Anna Chen. I'm sorry we didn't get to your question, but reach out to either of these guys. What's the best way to get in touch with you guys? You guys all over LinkedIn, I assume?
LinkedIn, I'm Matt Lopez at Skaled. You can hit me up.
Perfect. Connect these guys, and we can answer that question that we didn't get to. And gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really, really enjoyed that chat. I know we got some great engagement, and our community did too. So thank you for the insights.
Thanks, Scott. Pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And everyone who joined us, peace. Have a good one.